Hello, welcome to my podcast. Thank you for being here with me again. Today, I have another guest from the Stability Network, which makes me very, very happy. The Stability Network, for those who haven't listened to my previous episode, is an initiative that was brought about around 2011. And what they do is they have all these leaders, they are trained to be public speakers, and they talk about mental health openly and honestly about their struggles, their treatment, the stigma that surrounds mental illness. Some of them share their suicidal thoughts and ideation. Some of them share, which I interviewed and I've already posted the episode. Some of them struggle themselves with loss by suicide. So I'm very happy to have with us today Ted Weiss, and he told me, I was asking him, how do I say your last name? And he goes, rhymes with nice. Okay. That's not easy for me to remember.
Mhm.
So Ted, thank you so much for being here with us. And Ted is going to talk about, and it really amazed me to you sent, because I usually ask my guests to send like a page of their story, just so I have some background, and of course it helps prepare for the interview. And he was telling me about his struggle with mental illness, and I was amazed at just to read. This was like 50 years ago. So you have seen mental illness evolve. I don't know if that's the right name for that, but at least the stigma is not as prominent as it used to be, for sure. But you started struggling in your, were you in your 20s when it
28
started?
was 28 was when I had my first episode.
Yeah, but this was a long time ago, because Ted, just so you know, Ted is 76 years old. So this was when, in a time when we can't even talk about stigma. It's not just stigma, but very little was known about mental illness, wasn't it? So tell me a little bit about your experience back then when you started. And it seems like you were aware then that there was something there to be treated.
Yes, well, it was a real shock because I had finished law school 3 years earlier and was working with a very good law firm here in Houston, uh, learning to be a trial lawyer, which was my goal, and really enjoying everything that I was doing in terms of work and life generally. And all of a sudden, it actually resulted from a broken engagement over a period of weeks. I just found myself emotionally going down, down, down. I couldn't figure out, what was happening. I said, I've had not broken engagements, but broken relationships before, and never affected me like this. And so eventually, I got to the point that I call rock bottom, just totally depressed, totally in despair, feeling nothing was going to get better, and became suicidal in terms of thoughts and feelings. And it was very different from the way that I normally thought of myself being. And fortunately, I reached out for help, and I ended up hospitalized. And as you were saying earlier, the number of medications that were available at that time, which is 1973, were much fewer than they are today. And it took some experimenting, but eventually I found a medication that, as I said, brought me out of the dark hole. And
Mm-hmm.
it was sort of, I use the expression like a fog lifting. The fog would
Mm-hmm.
gradually lift. And then over a period of weeks or months, I got back to basically where I was before it started in
I'm sure it
terms of
was a
my
very,
emotional.
very scary. It sounds like a very scary, because you were saying I was doing well. I was in finished law school. You were working for a firm that you believed in, and you were happy. And these are the questions you had at the time. Is why? I mean, this is just that's how we think, right? This is just a relationship, right? So why am I feeling this way?
Yeah,
I'm
and the
sure it was
mistake.
very scary.
Yeah, well, as I tell people, I actually went through two other episodes similar to this in terms of, being very severe,
Mhm.
downturn, suicidal thoughts and feelings, hospitalization. But in all three of those instances, I refused therapy, which was a huge mistake. But at the
Really?
third time, pardon, yes. And, I had all the stereotypes about, psychiatrists and, they couldn't help me. And so, but as I say, looking back, it was clearly a mistake because after the third episode, I got into uh, therapy for very, intense therapy for 7 or 8 years, which enabled me to identify the psychological triggers that were causing these downward spirals. Obviously, I had the genetic predisposition, I
Component,
believe, in
yeah.
terms of brain chemistry, but it was really these psychological factors, mainly dealing with authority figures and needing approval from,
Hmm.
authority figures that when I didn't get that approval because I was very driven and, trying to accomplish what my goals were. And when that didn't happen, as I learned, I didn't have what I call emotional independence, where, we'd say we have children when they get to the end of high school and they're getting ready to leave home, we'd like for them to be in a position where whatever happens in their lives, and we know everybody's going to have setbacks, that they can handle it. And I just, as I learned in the therapy, I just was not prepared for that. I hadn't really had setbacks before this first episode, but I definitely needed to understand what it meant to, you know, feel good about yourself, independent of what other people are saying about you or thinking about you.
Yeah, and it's interesting the position that you put yourself in. You're saying that you needed approval. Of course, back then you didn't know, but then you choose this very high stress. You wanted to be a court lawyer.
Mhm.
So you really raised the bar too. So you put yourself in a position that I don't want to fail, but my goodness, not to fail in that position and in that profession, it's quite hard, isn't it? Because this is something that takes a lot from you.
Very, it's a very stressful profession. And I mean, I continued on in that profession. My career at this large law firm eventually uh, basically ended because of the series of episodes of major depression. And after that, I practiced primarily on my own, which was psychologically much better for me because I didn't have
Mhm.
any authority figures to, approve my work or my practice. But it was an adjustment, but I liked the work. And but you're right. I mean, it's hard to imagine, at least in my view, a more stressful uh, profession. And that's, as you know, I'm sure, stress is not a good thing for people who are dealing with mental health challenges. And so, from that standpoint, but I think as time went by and I had more experience and, the stress level declined some. And uh, more than anything, it was just understanding what these psychological factors were
Mhm.
that, would cause me to go into the downward spiral.
Uh-huh. Tell me about your experience. And you mentioned that you actually ended up leaving the firm because of these episodes. Were they understanding then? Because, as I mentioned before, this was a long time ago.
Yeah, I was with the firm. I mean, I'd been there 3 years when I had this first episode, and I stayed for, I mean, I was there for 21 years and
Mm-hmm.
became a partner. I mean, I really can't say enough about the firm, the people who knew
Yeah.
about what had happened to me. They were very responsive. Of course, it wasn't a period of time when people really understood, what was happening to me, but they were supportive. I would be gone for 2 or 3 months in terms of
Really?
recovery.
That long?
Yeah,
Okay.
and people would cover for me in terms of my work. Uh, So I was fortunate really to be in a large law firm where there were people who could step in, and they were willing to do that. But eventually, what really happened was that I reached a level of seniority where I needed to be in charge of major pieces of litigation. Well, the firm knew my history, and if they put me in that position, and I had a mental health challenge, similar to what had happened. And the client learned later about all this, and they found that the firm had known about it. It could be a serious problem for the law firm. So there really just wasn't a future for me there. After these three episodes, and but as I said, they treated me extremely well. I had absolutely nothing negative to say about the firm at all. And when I did move on, as I said, and got into practicing independently, I didn't even realize at first how much better it would be for me
Mhm.
psychologically. But essentially, being my own boss, and I mean, if I
It gives you
succeeded,
freedom, right? It gives you a lot of
yes,
freedom. Yeah. Yeah.
psychologically, it was just completely different, and had its own share of challenges in terms of developing business and managing my small business, but
Mhm.
nevertheless, it was much better for me in terms of my mental health situation.
Yeah. What about relationships? You're talking about your profession, but how did these episodes or the mental illness affect your relationships? Did you feel that you could talk to someone? Did you have friends to talk to?
No, and you raise a very interesting point, because I learned in therapy that uh, I tell people what I learned in therapy was I lived the first half of my life, which was about 45 years before I got into therapy, in the world of accomplishment. I
Mm,
wanted to accomplish things. I wanted to succeed. I was nice to people because I wanted them to like me. I was a people pleaser, but I really didn't have close relationships. And part of that is that, as I've learned since the therapy, you have to commit time to relationships in order to really have strong relationships. And for me, as intense as I was about success, it was like, well, I don't want to spend a 2 hour lunch with somebody. I got to get back to the office and get the work done, and that's how I'm going to get ahead. But I learned, and as I said, I learned in therapy about the world of relationships, and so since that time, I think I have. Well, I know I have lived differently in terms of putting a priority on
mhm,
really good relationships, some within my family, but also outside the family. And again, the mental health part of it, has been useful in the sense that I have relationships with people who have a history of mental health problems, but a lot of people who don't. And, uh, and so relationships have become much more important to me. But back when all this was happening, which was your initial question, I really didn't have anybody that I could talk to. My wife, of course, knew about the situation. It was very traumatic for her because, we had children at that time, and eventually had four children, and all of that was very difficult for her in terms of managing the family when I had these problems. But as far as a friend who could be a confidant or anything like that, no, I didn't. And frankly, that there was a feeling of loneliness. I mean, I lived for 32 years under the stigma of guilt and shame and loneliness, not wanting people to know about my history, and it was only, as I mentioned in my report to you before the session here, that at age 60, that I decided to go public, and that was a complete change when
uh-huh,
I
uh-huh.
opened up about my history and no longer had any hesitation to talk to people about my mental health
Mhm.
problems.
I want to go back a little bit.
Mhm,
Of course, I want to touch on this. I mean, opening up and the importance of talking about it. But
mhm.
tell me a little bit about the therapy process. Was it scary for you at first?
Uh, no, I wouldn't say scary. It
Mhm.
was, it was sort of frustrating
Mhm.
because, and I had a outstanding psychodynamic therapist who actually is a psychiatrist. He's retired now, but that was pretty unusual in those days to have a psychiatrist who, was handling my medication, but also conducting the therapy, which I think was a big advantage. Uh, but I literally I had to learn to recognize my feelings. I mean,
Wow.
I tell people, I literally, when he started, said, well, how are you feeling? And I'd say, well, I'm hot or I'm cold. And he said, no, 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 I'm talking about inside. So, I mean, I had
Hot
just,
and cold were emotions.
right, 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 right. I mean, I had stuffed my
Oh my
feelings,
God. Yeah. There was no
by,
language there, right? There was no language for that.
right, right. So it took a long time. And, I was, my attitude was kind of, well, tell me what the problem is. Tell me what I need to do. I'll do it. And, everything will be fine. But, that's, as you know, as a professional in this area, that's not the way it works.
Mhm.
And so I finally became more patient and was willing to, work through. And again, my whole family history, my life history, my religious upbringing, my school experiences, really just kind of learning to understand who I really was and realizing that, frankly, a lot of the things I thought I knew or understood about my childhood, my growing up, were not true. And so, once I learned more about who I am and about, what influences were working on me, during my growing up years, and even after I became an adult, in college and law school, and it was really eye opening, and
Mhm.
I say that I think this doctor uh, may well have saved my life. He certainly
Certainly
came.
transformed it, helped you transform it, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah, yeah, it's so important that you mentioned this, Chad, because so many times, and I see, of course, sometimes in my own clients, someone will come to you and they want answers, immediate answers, and they don't want to spend much time. They want to know when it's going to end, right? And many times they want medication because it's faster, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
So it does take time. Therapy is a long-term process many times. It depends, of course, it depends on what brings you to therapy. But in your case, I mean, you had to rediscover yourself, right?
Exactly. And I mean, I would say it's the most valuable experience that I've ever had in terms of self knowledge and, sort of getting to know who I really am as opposed to who I was trying to be. I had a
Mhm.
father who was a trial lawyer, and, he very much wanted me to do what he had done. And so
Mm.
I certainly considered other things, but I eventually decided to do that. And in many ways, I was trying to be the kind of trial lawyer he was. He was very aggressive, very, very domineering personality and that kind of thing. And that just wasn't me. And I use that
Wow.
as one example of where, I was trying to be somebody that I'm not. So I really learned who I am. And so, I could adjust my approach to life to
Mhm.
be more compatible with who I am rather than who I'm trying to be.
Hmm. You mentioned also that you found what your triggers were. Can you tell me a little bit about those
Sure.
triggers and
Well,
your coping mechanisms? How did you cope with these triggers?
well, the main trigger, as I mentioned earlier, was this need for approval
Mm-hmm.
from authority figures. And this goes back starting with my father, and then I was in the Catholic Church. I mean, my parents were very very devout Catholics. So I went to Catholic elementary school, Catholic high school, and there I treated the priests and the nuns like they were gods, almost in
Mm-hmm.
terms of
Mm-hmm.
doing what they told me, couldn't question anything, and so throughout this, I had this dependence on authority figures for approval. And again, during those times, fortunately, I guess in some sense, I was achieving, I was doing well in school, so I wasn't getting disapproval. But uh, the the incidences that caused those first three uh, serious depressions would strike most people as being trivial. The broken engagement, well, anything that I perceived as a rejection, would I learned, at the time, of course, I had no idea what, as I said, what was going on. But, with the benefit of therapy, I could see that, while, I mean, she even said, look, it's not you, it's, the lifestyle that I'd live if I were married to a lawyer at a big law firm. Be that as it may, it affected me. And then what happened in the later episodes, by that time, I had become a partner at the law firm. And decisions are made annually about how much increase each partner will get in their shares of ownership in the firm. The first year that my percentage was not as high as somebody else in my class, uh, you know again, I was treating these people who were the management committee of the law firm, that's like 6 people. Well, these were my law partners, but I was treating them like they were my parents, and so they were telling me, well, you're not really doing that well. You're not doing as well as one of your peers. You know, believe it or not, given my psychological makeup at that time, was enough to trigger, these serious depressions. And that's really what happened in both of the later depressions. I mean, my history, I've learned, is really sort of unusual in the sense that these episodes were like 7 years apart. And between that time, after I got the medication and of course rejected therapy, I was off medication and asymptomatic. And then the
The
trigger.
rejection would come again. Yeah,
Mhm,
some kind of
mhm.
rejection. So here is someone who is always seeking approval from authoritative figures. At the end of the day, your father, so you always want to be good enough.
Mhm,
And when they gave you a grade C or a grade B,
mhm.
you just perceived it as, okay, I'm right, I am not good enough. So that's what triggered your depression. Makes
Yeah, I
total
mean,
sense.
in the world I was operating in, I was making a lot of money. I was, certainly it was not a matter of supporting my family or anything like that, but it was just this perception I had because I was so driven to succeed. And as you say, I had not developed uh, the relationships with people that I think could have supported me. I mean, for one thing, I was not willing to be vulnerable. And, I wasn't about to, and I mean, in general, I wasn't going to talk about anything negative about myself. Well, you can't really be a friend, at least in my view, a really good friend of someone, without being willing to be vulnerable. And so, I just didn't have a support system, I guess you'd say, uh, beyond my family, my immediate family. Uh, my parents cared about me, I know that, but they didn't really understand, and I think it was scary to them as well. And so I just, I'm not blaming anybody for that, but I'm just saying that, because of my personality, because of my, you know, inability or unwillingness to devote time to
Mhm.
developing relationships, I didn't have anybody that I could call on.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm just thinking now you talked about your father, and of course, you kind of mirrored your father in a way. And I'm
Mhm.
just wondering about the the makeup of the whole family. So maybe you were the one who broke the cycle of the family, right?
I definitely am the one, and my I have one older sister, and my parents clearly, I mean, in their generation at least, they had very different expectations for their son as opposed to their daughter. But my sister did basically, what they expected. She married well and had children and a family and that sort of
Mhm.
thing. And of course, for me, it was, to get out in the world and be a success. And
Mhm.
and but once I had these episodes, and realized that I was trying to be somebody that I was not, and frankly, seeing my career, you know, not going where I expected it to go in terms of success, and so all of these things really caused me to be, you know, I mean, my parents still cared for me. It wasn't that, but I was clearly different. I mean, they were,
Mm.
and and frankly, it had to do with religion as well. I mean, eventually, I came to the point where I decided that I was going to leave the Catholic Church, which
Mhm.
was it fit with. This was right around the time that I was leaving the law firm, because the issue I had was authoritarianism. And by that I mean, while most Catholics, certainly in the United States, and I was one of those, may disagree with certain teachings of the church, they still say, well, I'm still Catholic. But I realized that as far as Rome was concerned, that was just not acceptable. That you
Mhm.
were expected to follow the teachings and support the teachings, and basically you were not free to think for yourself.
Mhm.
And so, in terms of this religious organization, at least officially, and I just
Mhm.
said I'm not comfortable, and that was a big positive. I ended up, my wife is a lifelong Methodist. The Methodist Church is kind of the polar opposite in the sense that you're expected to study and join groups and decide for yourself
Debate. Yeah.
what you believe. And so again, but my parents, I mean, I went to their house and told them, you know
Must have been
they
hard for them, huh?
very hard, and
Yeah.
they never said a word about it afterwards. And I didn't pursue the subject or anything. But your point about, yes, I was I don't think of it as black sheep, but I was the one that sort of broke out of the mold. I mean, because
Uh-huh.
this was a tight knit family, dedicated Catholics. And I mean, for me to leave the church was just, just kind
Unthinkable, I'm
of
sure.
unheard of,
Yeah.
unheard of,
Yeah.
just,
Yeah.
it couldn't happen. And but again, I'm convinced that all of these things were important steps
Of course. Yeah.
toward reaching mental health. And
Yeah. Yeah.
because I was at that point, I was being myself, and
Yes.
I'm much more comfortable in an environment where, like you say, you can debate, you can argue, you can respect other people's positions, but not feel like somebody is imposing on you
Mm-hmm.
certain things that you must accept, whether that's politically or in religion or
Mm-hmm.
education or anything else. I
Yeah. Yeah.
I just want to have the freedom to be myself.
Yeah, tell me, how did it affect? Because I can see maybe the opposite happening within your own family, your kids and your wife. How did they perceive all the changes that you went through?
Well, I'm not, frankly, there's been a lot of sort of ignoring, I guess you'd say. I mean, it really troubled me because uh, particularly the third episode occurred at a time that was very significant age-wise for my three older children. My last child was too young, but the point is, I knew it was going to have an impact on them. I mean, to have their father in the psychiatric ward of a hospital, locked up, and they have to come to visit, and all that sort of thing. But and I've certainly talked to them, but never that much about this issue. The main thing I've talked to them about is just warning them that if they ever have any feelings of severe depression or whatever, reach out for help. Whoever it is that you are comfortable, but don't ignore the problem. But frankly, I've changed, but I don't think people in my family even necessarily recognize, that I,
Really?
yeah, and
Huh.
uh, and maybe it's a reflection of, you know, I'm not even sure my wife, the whole experience, and I'm not necessarily
Placing judgment.
criticizing her.
Yeah.
It was so traumatic. I mean,
Hmm.
and obviously she had fear in terms of the financial situation of supporting the children and all that when I went through these episodes. And
Hmm.
but I mean, she's actually had professional training, but I'm just not sure. We've talked about some of these things, but usually it just creates a lot of turmoil for her. And
Yeah. Maybe
so,
it's triggering for her.
yeah, so we're not, so, and again, with my children, of course, they're all grown now, but, my sense is when I raise the subject, they just don't want to talk about it, you know,
Hmm.
and talk about, well, the kind of conversation I'm having with you,
Hmm.
obviously, you know, that's
Yeah.
different. You're professional and so forth, but we just unfortunately have not been able to have those conversations.
Hmm.
And I think they understand at some level. Uh, I mean, I think they have to observe,
Of
particularly
course.
as I've gotten involved in these mental health organizations and
Uh-huh.
spending time with that. I think they recognize, and I mean, I'll send them a copy of what we're producing.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. And so I hope this podcast opens that door a little bit more, right?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
I had an interview on our blog on the Stability Network
Hmm.
website that I sent them. Although my daughter-in-law responded, but not my sons or my daughter. So anyway,
Well, we all have our own time, right? It's
right,
it's I'm sure it's a healing process for the whole family.
yeah.
And they will come at their own time. Let me
Mhm.
just ask you to end. How was it? You told me that at 60 you decided to come out and talk about it and participate in these initiatives. How was that for you to come? Because it's different going through these changes internally and going to therapy and knowing that you're being transformed, but
Mhm.
it's totally different when you open up to the public. And as you said, that's when your friends know about it, that's when your family knows about it. So
Mhm.
has that been helpful too for you?
Extraordinarily helpful. And what happened very briefly is that I was at a luncheon, and one of the speakers was a man who had been very successful in the corporate world here in Houston, been, CEO of two large energy companies. And he was telling his story about having experienced severe depression and you know, eventually recovering. But to his credit, he had decided to, go out and talk before public audiences, telling his story and encouraging people to get help, and also encouraging people in the corporate world to provide better mental health services for their employees. So I was sitting there and I said, I've just turned 60. My children are, pretty well grown now. So if it affects my law practice, in a negative way as far as income, uh, it's not as serious as it would have been, when I was 30 or 40. And so I just said, I'm going to go public with my story. And uh, as I said, I don't think I realized until a while later how liberating it would
Yeah.
be to not have to, keep everything secret. Uh, and frankly, I say today when I give my talks that I refuse to feel guilt and shame because
Good for you.
I had an illness, just like other
Mhm.
illnesses. It's treatable, it's manageable, and but that was that was a complete change from the attitude that I'd had for 32 years before that, and uh,
Mhm.
and also getting involved. I mentioned this support group that I was the volunteer facilitator for 8 years. I mean, anything that I've done by way of giving back, because that was one of my goals when I went public, fight the stigma and try to give back. And all of that has been very therapeutic
Mhm.
in itself. And so, but I don't tell young people, to, well, just, walk into your boss's office and say, look, I've got this problem with depression. I need some time off. I mean, it's risky, and I wish we were in a world now where everybody understood, and certainly some employers. And I think the point you made earlier, I think things have changed
They have. I'm sure you've
significantly
seen a huge change. It's
from
been
1973, but
yeah.
I still, you know, and even in the legal world, because I give talks in law firms now who are, wanting somebody like me to come in and tell
Good.
their stories so that young lawyers will be encouraged to get help and that. So the culture is definitely changing, but I think there's still a way to go, and I think a lot of it has to do with education. I think the more people are willing to learn about these illnesses,
Hmm.
less prejudice and
Yeah.
discrimination.
I used to believe that I mean education is important, but one of the specialists that I interviewed a while ago, he told me that all the research shows that education is important, but nothing beats lived experience.
Mm,
So that's what research says, that education is nothing if you don't hear it from someone who's been through it.
mm,
If you don't hear it from you, Ted, that
mm,
you came
mm,
here, you're on my podcast, and you're talking about your struggles and everything, all the transformation that your life went through internally and also externally. So I thank you for doing this work, and I hope you continue doing it,
mm.
and I hope you send this to your sons, and and they call you back, say, "Okay, Dad, let's go have coffee."
Right, right. Uh, you're encouraging me. I might even be more assertive and say, "Did you watch the video?
Yes,
Can
yes.
we
Don't
talk
wait.
about
Just
it?"
ask them. Ask them. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I hope you. What are their names?
David and Jim
Okay,
and
David and
John. They're
Jim.
actually three. There are
Oh,
three of
so
them.
David, Jim,
And John.
and John. David, Jim, and John.
Mhm,
I hope that I know it's hard. I know it's family. It's your dad. It's the dad that you love. This is
mhm,
a very tough topic to talk about.
mhm,
And but I hope you call him, guys, sit down, and this opens up this dialogue within your family. That would be
mhm,
great.
mhm.
Thank you, Ted.
All right.
Thank you for coming, and thank you
Thank
for
you.
participating.
All right. Thank you very much.
And I hope everything is fine in Texas now.
We're getting back on our feet
Oh
slowly.
my
Mhm,
goodness. I have great friends there, and I'm so worried about them. But
mhm.
it's getting back to normal, right?
Yeah, yeah. And we have the president who is going to be coming tomorrow to Houston. So we're
Oh, really?
looking forward
Okay.
to having him and sort of showing him some of the
Yeah.
things that,
Yeah.
he's interested in seeing.
Well,
But
I'm sure that by the time I post this, because it's going to take a few weeks, everything will be fine. And yeah, thank you. Thank you for being with us, Dad. Have a
all
good
right.
day.
All right. Bye bye.